Hello, I'm Gary Stearman, and today on Prophecy in the News, we're going to address a subject that you may have seen in the news recently. It's all about Noah's Ark. We have a gentleman with us today who is an authority on Noah's Ark, and I'll be introducing him to you in just a moment. And welcome to today's Prophecy in the News. We have a guest. His name is Arch Bonnema. He comes from McKinney, Texas, and he's been to the mountaintop. We'll be talking about that a little bit later. Welcome to Prophecy in the News, Arch.
Thank you, Gary. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. We're going to first ask you about the news item that's been all over the news, the world news, actually. Noah's Ark discovered in Turkey on Mount Ararat. What do you think about that?
Interesting, isn't it?
It
is. Everybody says no one's interested in hearing about God anymore and the Bible anymore, and yet it made worldwide news when they found it.
Good point.
Unfortunately for them, within 3 days it was proven to be a fraud, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But I think what's interesting is that so many people continue to go to Mount Ararat in Turkey, because the Bible is very clear on where Noah's Ark is, and Turkey doesn't fit that model at all.
Mount Ararat, Turkey, we've had astronauts climbing Mount Ararat. We've had satellite photos. The world's attention's been focused on that particular mountain, which, by the way, stands all by itself. It's just, there it is, right out in the middle of a plain, right?
It's interesting because Genesis 8, verse 4 says, as the waters receded, the ark came to rest in the mountains of Ararat. And it's true. If you look on a globe or a map, it shows Mount Ararat in Turkey. What it doesn't show is it wasn't named Mount Ararat until 4,000 years after the flood. And if you go to Wikipedia, in the 11th century, the Armenians started calling it Noah's Mountain. Then in the 13th century, Marco Polo was traveling across Turkey on the way to China. When they said, this is Noah's Mountain, and Noah's Ark is on this mountain, he said, well, then that must be Mount Ararat, and wrote Ararat in his book and on the map, and that was the first time that was called Mount Ararat.
So, by extension, they came up with the name of the mountain. This is Noah's Mountain, therefore it must be Mount Ararat.
That's right.
Backwards logic.
But the interesting thing, the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says it landed in the mountains of Ararat, but doesn't say Turkey. The first two clues that we have a problem is it says mountains, plural. And except for Mount Ararat with little Ararat being right alongside of it, that's the only thing that there is for mountains out there. And the next verse is even more specific. As the waters continued to recede, the tops of other mountains all came into view. You know, we used to have military bases there, and I've had pilots email me, write me, call me, saying, you know, we flew around Mount Ararat, and you couldn't see anything for hundreds of miles. I flew across it at 38,000 feet, and the pilot said, look out the right side of the plane, you'll see Mount Ararat. And sure enough, but as far as you could see at 38,000 feet, there were no other mountains that could be seen. So
what you're saying is the recent claim that's being made is false.
But it goes back a long time. In 1616, Sir Walter Scott wrote in 1616 that it was impossible for it to be in Turkey because of Genesis 11 verse 2. 11 verse 2, it says, as Noah's sons came off the mountain, they traveled from the east to Shinar. Well, if you're traveling from the east, you're headed west. Now here's the problem, is Mount Ararat in Turkey is northwest. So if you're already west, you come off the mountain and travel west, how far do you have to go before you're east?
Yeah, a long, long way.
That's correct. So when the NIV was written, someone looked at the map and said, uh-oh, the Bible was written wrong. They corrected the Bible, so they said Noah's sons traveled eastward instead of from the east.
Yes.
The problem is the Greek says apo, apo, from the east.
Yes.
The King James says from the east. The Hebrew says from the east, but the NIV changed it. What was interesting, in 2008, after me giving this talk many times, I got a Bible in the mail from the NIV saying, please don't say that we're saying it more, we've changed the Bible. So from 2008 forward, the NIV now says, Noah's sons traveled from the east.
And from the east they did travel. Now, if you go from the traditional site, Mount Ararat, and get to a site that you're interested in, you have to go toward the east.
If we do just the opposite, if we go to Shinar and go to the east, you find the range of mountains that for more than 2,000 years was called the region of Ararat. And there's a mountain there that there are 4 maps from 900 AD all the way back to 600 BC that show one mountain that has Noah's Ark on it. From different explorers over a 1,700-year time span, 4 explorers claim to have found Noah's Ark. And that mountain is Mount Suleiman, the only mountain in the entire Middle East with a Hebrew name.
Solomon. How about
what it
that?
is.
Yeah.
Mount Suleiman.
All right, now we get to the interesting part of the story. Arch Bonnema has actually traveled to the quote-unquote mountains of Ararat mentioned in the Bible. This is what you believe you've done. And you have actually climbed one of those mountains. Tell us how that happened, how you came to climb that particular mountain, and what you saw.
Well, there's a group of 14 of us that went back there in June of 2006, just a few years ago. And as we climbed the mountain, when we got to the base camp, our Sherpas, our mountain guides, there was 5 of them. The grandfather in his 70s, his 2 sons in their 40s, and 2 grandsons in the 20s. When the grandfather approached us, he said, "Why are you at my mountain? You're the only second white people I've ever seen. The first ones were Germans 35 years ago."
Wow.
Well, our comment was, before we left, it looked like the war between Israel and Iran was breaking out, so we weren't going to be talking about Noah's Ark. So we just said, we're looking for an object. He lit up, he says, "You want to see Noah's Ark?"
Yeah.
We said, "Well, okay, why do you ask?" "Because it's on my mountain." He said, "I haven't seen it for more than 50 years. But each year now, the ice, it keeps melting up. Global warming." And he says, "This is the first time we can see it in more than 50 years. And that, of course, extraordinarily raised our anticipation and adrenaline level.
And so you began the trek, and you got there, and to make a long story, and it's, by the way, could be a very long story, to make a long story short, what did you see as you came upon this scene, which he claimed to be the scene of Noah's Ark?
At 13,126 feet, we found the petrified remains of an ancient ship.
Okay.
We took more than 1,000 pictures. As a group, we took more than 1,000 pictures. We brought back 16 pieces of it. We sent 5 of the pieces to 5 different labs. All the labs came back with the same answer. They said you have the petrified remains of an ancient ship, based on 3 things. First of all, it was petrified wood. Secondly, 2 of the pieces had saltwater creatures that had burrowed deep into the wood and became petrified with it. And finally, some of the pieces were soaked with pitch. The only reason to soak wood with pitch is to make a ship. Now the question is, which ship is it?
Yes.
We looked all over for a plaque that said SS Noah, but there wasn't any. The scientists, however, gave us 3 options. It's interesting because they knew we had a ship, but how could you get a ship at 13,000 feet? The interesting thing is they came up with 3 options, and of course they were right up front. They weren't Christians, didn't believe the story of Noah's flood, didn't believe the Bible, but they said, let's just say one option is this Noah's Ark. The second option is there are more than 70 world religions that have the story of a worldwide flood with someone saving them from it. So it could be a different ship, different religion, different time. But actually the most probable thing was that the ship probably got beamed up there by space aliens. Maybe the ones who built the pyramids.
Oh,
And that's the options that they gave us.
modern mythology. Well, Arch, you've brought some samples, and I'm holding one here, which is a barnacle. Now, everybody's heard of barnacles. They are the plague of the U.S. Navy because they attach themselves to the outside of a ship's hull, and they grow a shell, and eventually you can become so barnacle encrusted that your ship begins to lose speed because of the drag. And it takes a while for a barnacle to attach itself and grow there. And when you found this petrified, whatever it is up there, it had saltwater barnacles attached to it.
It was interesting because there was a big article in Iran's national newspaper, the Persian Times, within 2 weeks after we got back, claiming these people, these Texans, which I was because that's where our president was from, was and still am, these Texans claimed to have found a ship in a mountain. Now at that time we never claimed how big it was. We just showed small pieces. They said, we looked at their small pieces on the internet, and if that really turns out to be wood, it's probably the remains of a sheepherder's cabin. How did the sheepherder's cabin get barnacles all over it?
How indeed, yeah. And well, the next item we have here is a piece of the petrified material that you say has a sea anemone.
Yes.
And by the way, it's beautifully clear here. A sea anemone grows in salt water.
Yes, and seashells are all in the same one. We actually came back with many, many pieces that the scientists all agree it's saltwater sea anemones, saltwater seashells, and saltwater remains.
Now, you may hear claims that somebody's found Noah's Ark. It came through the news. All those photographs of a wooden cabin being swept out that somebody said was up on top of Mount Ararat, a hoax.
Yes.
On the other hand, to find the petrified remains of a wooden ship at 13,000 feet, how did it get up there? And here's an interesting thing. Between the timbers of this ship, you found a material which looked like sand at first. Tell us about that.
Yes, actually, where the seams of the boards came together, you could see sand in all the seams. And on the pictures of our DVD, you'll look at it. If you brush away the sand, it's all pitch, just like a asphalt road. If you look at it, it has a tire on the road with they put seals in summertime. That's exactly what it looked like, and so is obviously remains of a ship. But one thing we should talk just a little bit about is that fraud, because some people probably heard the story, didn't hear what happened.
All right.
Because the world believes that Mount Ararat is in Turkey, and the Noah's Ark, a group of 5 Kurdish men found a very old building by the Black Sea, took pictures inside that building, and then raised the money that this building was on Mount Ararat and sold it to a group of explorers, Chinese explorers, for an enormous amount of money, carried the boards, trucked the boards up the mountain, carried them, and assembled them in a cave and took pictures of it. Well, part of the funny thing is the first picture you look at that they took of it before they took it apart had cobwebs over it. You know, at 13,000 feet, there's no cobwebs. This should have been the first climb. But
yes.
I think probably the best story on that, if you Google Dr. Randall Price, he has a pretty interesting story. He was one of the investors, and he gave $100,000 towards the expedition before he found out that it was fake. And he gives the evidence on the fact that it was fake, and it was all proven wrong, and was very embarrassed by it. But the important thing is he gives a very interesting explanation on what they thought they had found turned out not to be true.
A counterfeit ark. And by the way, as Arch pointed out earlier, it caused a stir worldwide. People may claim to be atheists, they may claim to be agnostics, but you show them a little bit of proof and their ears pop up. They're ready. Now, this brings us to something. This is the pièce de résistance here. We need to talk about this for quite a while. This is a petrified something, and it has wood grain in one side. And the wood grains, by the way, you'll be able to see those on a DVD that we're going to make available, so you can actually kind of experience the trek that Arch made up that mountain on your own and in your own time. This piece appears to be a curved piece of petrified wood. And when you brought this back, you said that's what you thought it was.
Actually, this piece, we almost didn't carry off the mountain because everything we took off, we had to smuggle through customs to get back, and all the pieces were this size. We had this one big piece, but I just couldn't keep putting it down. You know, we brought about 30 pieces off the mountain, decided we were going to bring half of them back, so I ended up taking this piece. It looks like a chunk of wood. In fact, on the DVD, when you watch it, you'll see about a 30-inch round log, and then it zooms in because we had to take pictures of everything it took. And this is where it came from. But
it has a slight curve on it, meaning that it came from a very large round log.
Probably one of the lower beams of it.
Except it didn't come from a log. Tell us what it really is.
Well, we sent it. This was on the second batch that we sent in because we thought it wasn't that important.
In other words, you decided the only way to find out what this thing is send it to a lab.
Yes, actually 5 labs.
5 labs?
Yes. And it was interesting because on the first lab, when we sent it to them, we had the scientists all on the phone from all 5 labs with all of our 14 climbers on telling us what they had. And while they were on one hand making fun of us because we thought we had Noah's Ark, on the other hand they were saying, this stuff is really interesting. we like to look more, and they charge us a lot of money for the first time we saw it. They said, if you have any more pieces, we won't charge you. We just want to look at them.
Wow.
And that's when we sent in this piece. And here's the interesting thing. You can see they cut off one corner of it. Out of this, they took it apart particle by particle. They found this is petrified animal waste from the bottom of the ship. If you imagine the whole of the ship as it filled in like silly putty when you're a kid.
Right.
You know, you put your fingerprint on, you can see it all comes back. Well, this is all packed into a wedge that was taken out of the log, and it became and took on the characteristics of the log, and that's why it looks like a piece of wood. But it's not. If you cut it open, there's nothing in here but solid material, and it's all animal waste.
Well, animal waste, you might call it, originally it was sort of a muck.
Yes.
That precipitated down to the bottom of the hold, and then it hardened up after it dried out, and then it became petrified. So what is in that muck?
Well, first of all, we have the cat hairs of 4 different types of large cats.
Really?
And many people don't understand, but you know, the tigers are in India, Southeast China. Lions are in Africa. They don't go together.
Right.
So to find cat hairs in the same ones. We found bird feathers that only exist in Africa. We found pieces of butterfly wings that butterflies only live in South America. And we found pieces of plant material that only grow in southern Pacific islands.
Wow.
And this is in northern Iran. All in the same piece. So they are not only in the same ship, you know that there's an enormous amount of DNA there.
Yes. Now, let's face it, you find a petrified something that's made of timbers that are coated with pitch. You find it at 13,000 feet, and then you find a piece of petrified muck that is the combined waste of many different animals from many different climatic zones, and pretty soon you begin to draw conclusions.
But here's an interesting thing. From Mount Suleiman, you can go 50 miles in any direction and find a climate that any animal, because there's a desert one direction, there's rain tropical forest, which we're in another direction, there's the plains area another section. So every type of animal in the world can live within 50 miles of Mount Suleiman.
Now, is it too soon to make the assumption that this is a petrified piece of Noah's Ark, or dare we say that?
I don't know. We have petrified pieces of an ancient ship.
Of an ancient ship at 13,000 feet in Iran, and it has animal waste from many different types of animals that come from many different climatic zones, plus vegetation that's not today native to Iran, I take it?
Yeah. Well, here's the interesting thing. A year after we had the first samples done, because we had to send the 5 samples to all the different labs to go through it. A year later, we got on the phone. All the climbers were on the phone, as well as all 5 labs. And it was supposed to be a 10, 15-minute phone call. An hour and 15 minutes later, we're into it, as they're describing everything that they found, and they keep getting more excited as they're talking. And these are all the guys who say, we're not Christians, we're scientists, you know. Finally, after an hour and 15 minutes, I said, okay, guys, well, what is it that we did find? And it went silent on the other end. And then one of the guys, I don't know who, said, oh, Mr. Bonnema, we've been talking about this for months, and we don't see how it can be anything but Noah's Ark. But don't use our names.
Now, this is a commercial lab. I take it a very reputable lab.
Yeah. So,
people who know what they're doing.
Yes.
And they weren't Christians.
But here's some more interesting thing. We had a call from Cambridge University, their DNA lab. And the call went, Mr. Bonnema, this is Dr. So-and-so from Cambridge University DNA lab. I'm not a Christian. I don't believe the Bible. I don't believe the story of Noah's flood. However, we just finished the DNA research of grapes. And the oldest grapevines in the world come from that same area you found that ship.
Wow.
Now, what's interesting, in Genesis 9, as Noah comes off the ark, he builds an altar. We found the altar. Makes a sacrifice, and the rainbow comes out. Verse 20, he plants a vineyard. Now all of a sudden Cambridge University is saying, hey, that's where the oldest grapevines are in the world. Same place that the Bible says Noah planted a vineyard.
The mother of all vineyards.
Yes.
Amazing.
And 10 days later we get a call from the U.S. DNA lab. These people are searching us out, and it's really interesting. You know, this is Dr. So-so from the U.S. DNA lab, and just thought you might find it interesting. I'm not a Bible believer, don't believe in the story of Noah's flood. However, We traced the DNA of horses. And the oldest horses in the world come from that same area in northern Iran where you found that ship.
So they must have come off the ark. Wait a minute, we're getting ready to say it here. Although, now tell me about what you told me earlier before we went on, because I think this is interesting. You go to public schools and you make this presentation, and you can do it because of the way you present all this.
Well, obviously we cannot make a claim we have Noah's Ark.
Right.
We don't know. We have scientific proof that we found an enormous petrified ship at 13,100 feet that has DNA from animals from all over the world. So when I give the talk, I say, let me give you the evidence that we have, and then you decide which ship it is. That way, I'm not making a religious talk, it's a scientific talk. And school systems, even in the U.S., have allowed me to come and speak in the U.S. and the school systems because it's not a religious talk.
Amazing. Well, you're listening to Arch Bonnema, a world traveler. He has seen some fascinating things in his day. And Arch, let's go on and talk about more about your experience. Now, you're up there, you're collecting these samples. You told me that you actually saw what Noah must have seen. And this is an interesting story to me because the Bible talks about the waters receding, and Noah witnessed a particular phenomenon.
In Genesis 8, verse 5, it says, as the waters receded, the tops of the mountains all came into view. We've already discussed the Mount Ararat in Turkey. There aren't any.
Yes.
As we climbed the mountain, we went through a snowstorm going up the mountain. As we were setting up our camp, as the clouds started going down. Now, if you've ever flown in a jet where all the clouds are even, they're level, they're not, cumulus piled up, but they're just level, that's what the flood would look like. As the clouds went down the mountain, tops of other mountains all came to view. In fact, from that mountain, there are 16 peaks over 14,000 feet that can be seen from Mount Suleiman.
The mountains, plural, of Ararat. And folks, let me just take a moment here to say that's why it's important to believe that the Bible is the divinely inspired Word of God, because the little s on the end of a word makes all the difference. A mountain is different from mountains, plural. And the Bible says that the mountains appeared to Noah. And as I can just picture this in my mind, as the cloud receded, you could see first one peak and then another and then two more. And it must have been phenomenal.
And we all commented about the same time as we're watching this.
Really?
Look at out here. Look what's happening. This must be what Noah saw.
Amazing.
And I think God provided it for us to see that.
That's amazing. Now, what else would you like to tell us? To me, a barnacle, a saltwater barnacle, in a petrified wreck at 13,000 feet is fairly convincing. What else did you see that really struck you? The pitch, this material that you brought back. Did you find any metal artifacts or anything that looked man-made?
Well, the whole building, the whole ship looked man-made. I also want to say that we do not believe that Noah's Ark had a V-bottom or a V-bow, because the only purpose of a V-bow and a V-bottom is to travel fast. If you're carrying a lot of weight, you build it more in the shape of a barge. The Bible's statistics, it would make the ark approximately 450 feet long, approximately 75 feet wide, and approximately 45 feet high. And if it was in barge shape, it would easily hold all of the animals mentioned in the Bible. It was no longer in that shape today. According to the Sherpa, it went aground at about 15,000 feet, because that's where he saw it in the 50 years ago. He had seen it at 15,000 feet. And that's where 3 of our guys went up the mountain, and that's where they found the altar. Now, because the ark is on a landslide, as it slid down the mountain, and we believe this happened in the year 2000, there was an enormous earthquake there, killed 64,000 people in that region. And there's an enormous earthquake, and as it slid down the mountain, it hit solid rock and started piling up on top of each other. So today it looks like an enormous pile of debris, all those huge sections of wall, huge sections of, obviously man-made. You can look at the pictures on a DVD. Yeah. It was a man-made structure, but today it's all collapsed. And I think God wants to keep a little mystique in this.
Just enough for believers, but not enough to be a spectacle.
Yeah, however, even non-believers. Recently I was in Dubai, and I was coming through the Dubai airport, and there was an English-speaking magazine, newspaper there. And on the front page of it was a big article, "We have just found the great Muslim prophet Noah's ship." Guess where? Same place we found this one.
Wow.
Only now it wasn't the biblical Noah's Ark, it was the Muslims' Noah's Ark.
Noah's Ark. How about
So
that?
they believe that it is Noah's Ark also, just that Noah's Muslim.
Now, Arch, you've made some DVDs. Tell us a little about these. What's on them? We're going to make these available to you. And by the way, I think you'll be interested. Tell us what's on the DVD.
Well, we have a lot more scientific studies from it, evidence. We describe the whole trip, what the climate was like. For example, we leave our base camp, it's 99 degrees Fahrenheit, and we get up to cross the 12,000 foot to build up our summer camp. It's snowing crazy, and it's minus 20 Celsius. And how extraordinarily difficult the climb was. It's a very interesting one. We also have a lot more evidence, as I mentioned, that they talk, a lot more pictures. It's interesting because I've given these talks everywhere, in all kinds of settings. Some secular, some Christian, some all settings. And the most common comment I get afterwards when people come to look at the artifacts is they say, "Wow, this proves the Bible's true." Even when you're in church. And all the church people come forward.
Yeah.
Wow, this means the Bible's true.
Now, you've given these DVDs away.
Yes.
You haven't copyrighted them. By the way, if you get one of these, you're free to make as many copies of it as you want and pass it out to your friends, right?
My goal is not to make money off of Noah's Ark. My goal is to get the story out. The story of Noah's Ark is one of the 3 most recognized stories any place in the world.
Yeah.
What is a Bible story? One of the first 3 to come up is Noah's Ark. And it's a tremendous faith builder. Anybody who wants to make copies of them, they're welcome to it.
Essentially, do we have different DVDs or?
Well, the first one is the story of Noah's Ark.
Yes.
However, the second one is the story of the other ark.
The other ark.
Yeah.
Oh.
8 months after the first trip, Aksum, Ethiopia has claimed for 2,700 years to have the Ark of the Covenant. We made a trip there to look at the evidence that they had.
Arch, we're going to talk to you again. In fact, we're going to make a whole new broadcast with Arch about the ancient Ark of the Covenant. Gary Stearman, Prophecy in the News. Hope you enjoyed today's program. Arch, thanks. Prophecy in the News is a viewer-supported ministry sponsored by our many friends across America and in your area. For your gift of $10, you can receive a special edition of our current program on an audio CD, or for a gift of $20, we'll send you our programs on DVD videos. For either order, call the 800 number on your screen right now.